We're going to start with exporting your assets from Maya and putting them into Substance Painter. There's 3 different ways to do this, and we're going to start with the most easy one. First, select your entire object that you have in Maya, regardless of how many objects it's made up of or how big it actually is. Make sure that it's the entire object that you actually want to be texturing. Then go to File, Export Selection, and Desktop, or wherever you want to export your asset. I'm going to use this test file as a template just as we're going through our tutorial. Now you also want to make sure you scroll down into your file type specific options, go to Include, and then Geometry. Make sure the first and the third option are turned on, and nothing else. Then scroll down to Animation and make sure that's turned off as well if you don't have any animation, or even if you do. Then let's select Export and Confirm. Open up Substance Painter and make sure you go to File and New. Then select the object that you want to put into the program. I'm going to go on Desktop and go to Test and click Open. Then you're going to see that your asset is placed directly into Substance Painter. There's 2 more ways you can do this. For example, you can see up here that we have a texture set list, but there's only one object inside it. And also, if you switch between your 3D viewport and your dual viewport with the keys F1 and F2 on your keyboard, you're going to see that you actually have your UV space here as well. Now, imagine that you're working on a very large object, an object that has multiple pieces which take up multiple UV spaces. Now, to do that, you want to separate your object into separate texture sets, so you can turn pieces on and off and actually have separate work areas. To do this, you need to go into Maya and you need to make sure that you create an asset similar to this. All I've done here is I've made a separate material attach itself to each piece of the model. Now this is just for an example and not what you should do for an object like this, but I want to exemplify how this can be used. Let's select our whole object again and export it in the same location. Now let's go to Substance Painter and create a new scene with that same object we just exported. You're going to see that the exact same object is going to appear in our viewport, but what's different is that we actually have separate texture sets for every single separate piece of this object. And every single separate piece of the object has its own UV space. And furthermore, if I create a little color here on one of the pieces, you'll see that every single texture set actually has its own list of layers as well, or rather its own set of layers as well. Furthermore, when we get to baking, every single section of it has to have baking done for it itself. Now, how do we get to a point like this? Essentially, all you have to do is in Maya, you need to select your object, or at least the piece of it that you want to be separate, and you need to hold right-click and assign a different material, as I did in the other example. So, we want this to be a different material from everything else. I select the piece, hold right-click, and go all the way down, not to assign new material, because this is going to open a separate window, which is more hassle than it needs to be. And also not to existing material, because then you only get everything that you've made so far and the originals. We want to assign a new one. So we're going to go assign favorite material, which is going to give you a preset you can choose from. The preset we want to use is Lambert. Now you're going to see that it's going to apply a Lambert material to that object, which is going to show up here, and it's going to put a number on it depending on which one it is. Now you see that if I change this color, it's not going to change the rest of the object, whereas if I select every other piece of this model, it's actually going to change the color when I change the material's color. Furthermore, you'll see that every single other object here uses this Lambert one. And as I go back to Substance Painter and insert our original, if I just do it one more time, and I go to our low here, you're going to see that our entire object here, its entire texture set is called Lambert 1. This is because the name of the material that is applied to the pieces of your object in Maya is what's going to make up the material in Substance Painter. It's what's going to make up the texture set in Substance Painter. Now, you're going to see here that with this new object where we have Lambert 6, even if I don't change the color, because that's not actually important, the name is important. If I select all of this now, and I go File, Export Selection, apply to our test object here, let's go to Substance Painter and create it one more time. you're going to see that now, just like we did in Maya, our object is split up into two texture sets. Lambert 1, which was the original bottom piece, and Lambert 6, which is the new one we applied to the sphere. And again, in Maya, we can select our Lambert 6 and change it to something else, so m_bell. And this is going to apply over into Substance Painter as well once we export it. Do it one more time. There we have our object once more with, again, Lambert 1, the original, and m_bell. And all I would recommend when doing this sort of thing is, as you apply material to the separate object in your asset, to actually change the color as well, just so you can more easily pay attention to what different materials are and make sure you give them a name which is easily recognizable from the program. And you notice that if I go to my example here that I showed you before, each one is a different color and each one has a different material name. This is m_bell sphere, m_hoop, rope, etc., etc. Now, how do we actually export our high-resolution model into Substance Painter so that it helps us with our baking even more? I'm going to go back to our original and actually do this myself because I have another copy of the original here. And go back to our Lambert 1 here. I'm also going to go directly to our 3D viewport. Now, the first thing you do before you start texturing is you need to set up your baking. That's going to permit you on making better texturing details and actually help, just generally help the look of your model. To do that, we need to go into our texture set settings and go down to the Bake Mesh Maps button. Then, if you don't have a high resolution model, all you have to do is click the Use Low Poly Mesh as High Poly Mesh and click Bake the texture set you want. Click OK. That's going to generate all of these maps for you that you can use to actually texture your model and help you with this process. And this is also mainly a function you use to transfer high resolution details from your very dense ZBrush model to your very low resolution game model in Substance Painter. To do that, we need to export our ZBrush model or a high resolution Maya model from the program. For ZBrush, we simply need to go to Z plugin, FBX export import, and make sure you have only visible turned on for the exporting options. And then you simply need to click export and put it where you want to export it. Now, one important detail for this is that I have not moved the high poly or the low poly from its position since exporting it to ZBrush because we want them to be in the exact same space in terms of 3D. So for example, if I go here and find my high resolution object here, which I'm going to paste into Substance Painter, I'm just going to temporarily place it into Maya, which hopefully won't break the computer, so that you can see that it's going to be pasted directly on top of the object like this, because this is what we want to happen. Otherwise, you're going to have errors during the baking process. Anyway, let's go to Substance Painter and do that baking process one more time. I'm going to click Bake Mesh Maps, and instead of clicking the Use Low Poly Mesh, I'm going to click this little flag here, this little icon, and I'm going to go to the texturing section where I've saved this, which I believe is here. No, where did I paste it? Here. And I'm just going to click Bake once more time. But this time you're going to see that what happens is it takes the resolution, well, rather than the resolution, it takes the details from the high resolution model and it presents them on the low resolution model. And this is going to make texturing a lot easier for us. But you're also noticing that it's a little blurry, there's a few little errors, and parts of the model aren't actually showing up right, considering this rope here. And this is because our high resolution model does not have a rope. So how do we do this properly? Well, what we need to do, we need to go to our original little object here. We're going to place everything to use the default Lambert, except the little rope, which we're going to assign a different material, which I've already made here, called Bell Rope. Now, this is a different material from everything else. And I'm going to file and export this to the desktop or to wherever my workspace is. Let's start a new scene here. Select our asset that we just exported. Okay. And discard the changes. Now we have two texture sets. We have our main bell, and we have the rope here. And also you notice that I'm gonna select the main bell here, and I'm gonna do our baking process. I'm going to change our size to 1024, which is a higher resolution. And I'm going to choose our high resolution model as well. Then I'm going to scroll down here, increase the actual baking distance to 0.03 so that we get a few more of those little details. I'm going to change our anti-aliasing to ×8, and I think that's the last thing I need to do here. And then all I need to do is just bake it. And notice that actually there's two options here. There's Bake Lambert 1 and Bake the selected textures. Right here at the top, you have Selection. And these are your selected texture sets. Currently, it's both. I want to only bake these on Lambert 1, on our main bell, so I don't get that little error I got before. And that's what I'm going to do. You'll notice that now our baking is done and we have much fewer errors. The textures are much smoother, and generally it's looking a lot better and a lot better resolution. Now you'll notice here that when I also scroll down on my texture set settings, I also have all my maps created here. Now, if I go to the rope, you'll see they don't exist. And that's because the texture sets not only have different visibilities and different layer sets, they also have different bake sets as well. And I'm going to bake the rope by itself without the high resolution model and just use the low resolution one. And bake m_bell rope. That's the only one I want to do. And now that's pretty much ready for texturing. And that's how you would actually use a model like this that has two little pieces and put it into Substance Painter and do your baking so that you can start your texturing process on a good foot. And you can see here that if I show you the wireframe, it doesn't have any more resolution than before. It's simply taking a lot of the details from the high resolution and use it to create these maps which preview it in such a way that it looks very good and very high detail. Anyway, that's everything for now. There is another way that you could actually export your assets from Maya if you have a lot of different objects that are from a lot of different UV sheets. And I will cover that one by one with students who are in such situations because it's a little more complicated and deserves its own kind of section. But for now, we're going to move on to texturing. And after texturing, we're going to be moving on to the different maps and what they specifically actually do. So I hope that was useful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.